Well, before hopping into the syllabus and all the ins and outs of things, I'll tell you a little bit about me. I'm from the Antelope Valley. I am an alum of ABC. I dropped out of school in ninth grade and never went back. So like at 19, I came here without even a GED. It was like the late 90s. So you could get away with some of this stuff. We could still, I had to register for classes on the phone. Like they did, it was archaic. Nowadays, I don't think they'd let somebody without one of those things into the school, but I did. They want to take the assessment test and they're like, you don't know shit about anything. And I'm like, I know, but I traveled a bunch and played the guitar and have done all these other things for the last 4 or 5 years, but they were not helping me in terms of like life skills and like getting a good job and stuff like that. So I started in classes that are so remedial we don't even offer them here anymore. So I ground it out here. When I transferred, I think I had like 130 units. Like you can only transfer like 70, I think, most of them, like half of them were like either totally not necessary for my major because I switched it a bunch of times. Can I get an amen on that? Switching majors. The average college student switches majors 7 times, which, there's kids that are like, I'm going to be a doctor since they were 5 and they go to med school. Like they've never changed their major. That means there's other people that are changing way more than 7 times. They're probably rich kids, because that gets expensive at that point. You got a few chances to change, but whew. So, one of the good things about community college, in my experience and opinion, is that it forces us to do all of our general ed before transferring, which kind of sucks because it can feel like like high school 2.0 a little bit. You know what I mean? Like I picked history major not because of all the wonderful career options and the chance to make money. It was because I was like, well, if I got to go to school for 4 years, I like history classes. I could do that, but here I only got to take a few and I had to, got to do Spanish, math, and all your requirements. But the good thing about that is, there's a few good things. One, when you transfer, it's like all candy. It's just dessert. So if you love history classes, that's it. Like that's what you do for the next 2 years. You don't have, like I took statistics. I haven't even thought about a math equation in like 20 years. Okay. Like I was like, peace, I'm done. No more math ever for the rest of my life. And then luckily like smartphones came out and they're helpful with the math thing because I'm not great. But they also force us to like take that array of classes at the beginning. So, you might have never taken a psychology class in high school. You might have taken a history class, but there's a decent chance that your history class sucked because I've realized there are 2 groups of people that become history teachers. One, they're like restless, souls like me that love kind of big ideas and thinking about our past and our future and like why everything works the way it does and how history should be challenging us to like change our present moment and change the landscape before us. History is not preordained. The other group is people that are like, I really like history and love reading books and I don't like people and I love history because I don't want anything to change. And then they also like, once they start teaching, they don't never change anything in their class. I've shot myself in the foot multiple times in the last 12 years of teaching because I can't keep things the same. Like I'm always evolving the class, trying out new projects, bringing in new material. And after like 4 or 5 years straight of like adapting a new history textbook every year, because there's not a lot of great ones out there for American history. The best one I found was called Becoming America. And I liked it because it had a ton of cultural history in it, lots of arts and stuff like that. It was good that way, and it was very visual, but the book cost $190. Yeah, so like that was a problem for everybody. And it still didn't touch on like a ton of the stuff that I think is super important and super fascinating. And none of the textbooks touch on a bunch of the things that we're going to look at in this class. So if you've gotten into the material at all, or even on Satori, you'll see like I have a big emphasis on technology and the development of technology and the development of ideas, because we live in a highly technological society and it is only increasing. There's no going back unless it's catastrophic, right? Like a solar flare kills every satellite, orbiting the Earth and knocks out all of our, computers and stuff. Okay, we're Mad Max Fury Road then. Which, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, a little bit of me would be super into, and I'm like, I would thrive in that environment. It's less complicated. You know what I mean? Like, my problem is anxiety, and anxiety comes from too many things, and we live in a world of just too many things. There's just too much going on there. So, on a technological level, I feel like it's helpful to kind of know the origins and see the progress of those things from pre-electrical age, right? 1865, there's no light bulbs, right? I mean, the Civil War changed American society drastically and sped up industrialization for the whole world, but definitely for America. Before the Civil War, America is not a very important country. It's kind of backwater in terms of like what the European superpowers cared about things. Between 1865 and 1900, by the time we get to 1900, we're leading the world in industrial output and like steel production and railroad manufacture, all of it. I mean, it's like the whole society transformed so much. And it's interesting because we can see in 1900, oh boy, people are having a hard time with all the adjustments and all the changes. And for folks living in the like 1890s, 1900, I feel like, okay, like I can almost relate to them a little bit, because the transformation of their society, technologically speaking, with airplanes and automobiles and, light, indoor lighting, like not using lamps lit by, sperm whale oil, like that's a huge change. And that's just a few things. It was overwhelming. And around the time of the turn of the century is when we start getting our first like real dystopian novels of the future of like, people were much more hopeful back then too, because they had tons of utopian novels too, of like how wonderful the future will be like. But like the origins of like the Matrix, right? Or any number. I mean, there's so many dystopian novels and movies and TV shows now because, well, it reflects us, right? Like we all have anxiety about that. How many movies have been made about us making AI and then AI destroying us? Dude, and it is scary. And it's like, there have been so many, I mean, there's so many experiments they're doing all the time with it. And it's like, I don't even know how many different trials have happened where they, like hook it up to Twitter and they're like, give it instructions like, hey, do this and, promote cultural literacy and truth. And like within an hour, it's just like hate speeching and trolling people and like, oh, you dirty this and that. And it's like, pull the plug, like that went south so quick. And I think one of the reasons is our technological society is highly advanced right now. Our society is not. right? Like Elon Musk is building his own rocket ships and flying to Mars and bought Twitter just to ruin it. And people starve to death in our country every day, right? Like I don't have to tell anybody in this room what a problem homelessness is. Dear God, right? And I mean, it used to be just parts of the Antelope Valley. Now it's like, oh, it's all parts of the Antelope Valley. It's all parts of Los Angeles. It's like this is a dystopian nightmare. Like we are living if the founding fathers, and I'm only using this in the most vague of terms. When people use this in a political argument, walk away from them immediately. They don't know what the hell they're talking about because those guys didn't agree on anything. Okay, so it's like founding fathers, whatever. But all the whole group of them would probably just walk around slapping people in Washington, D.C. for a week straight. They'd be so like enraged and upset at what happened to the country. Because it's like, oh, we've not done well. And there's turning points for all these things. And I think, for Europe, World War I is that turning point where they realize, or begin to realize. And then after World War II, there's no kind of like naivety about the future, but there is in America still, right? The 50s and this, I mean, think of JFK, think of the 60s, think of all the optimism and this like the kind of grandiose way to talk about the country. But man, Watergate, and then, it got like double punched with the Reagan 80s. It was just like, oh, well, screw all that. We got none. It's every man for himself. Capitalism reigns, and like dog eat dog world. It's Wall Street, the movie in the 80s. Greed is good because greed drives innovation and change, and it's all the like bullshit that you hear tech industry people saying today, like we're making the world a better place. Yeah, I don't think so, Meta. Like Facebook, you are not doing that. You're turning old grandmas into vicious trolls that are just like never would have become those people had social media never been invented, right? Like so many people, I don't really go on Facebook anymore because it's like it's the old people. I mean, they really ruined Facebook. Baby boomers just had their day. And that's a generality. I'm not like bashing all baby boomers, of course. Like all the cool old hippie people today are baby boomers. They just didn't give up on the dream, right? Like they kept living the 60s, and not like in a pathetic way of just like, oh, they had values and they actually lived out their values for their lifetime. But a lot of those people that went to Woodstock, they gave up pretty quick. They get jobs, money changes people, responsibilities change people. I mean, this is the way the world works. But their values changed a lot because it was more part of the movement, and they're blowing with the wind. And honestly, that's millennials today. I think I am the tippy top of millennials. So I was born in 81. And would I have graduated? It would have been in 2000. So like we were the first, one of the first millennial years. But I'm a weird, like the people between like the late 70s and very early 80s, we're a weird group because my entire childhood was like, they didn't have kid car seats when I was a baby. Like they set me in the back of the station wagon in a basket. You know what I mean? Like smoking with the windows up, and there's no seatbelts in our car because it was older. Like that's not most millennials' experiences of early childhood, right? And we had vinyl records and just a typewriter. But I remember getting a computer, and we got one pretty early on. And get on the internet as like in junior high, and it wasn't it was a big deal. It was a big deal for the world. But I mean, I was junior high, so it was a big deal for me. I didn't really think much about it or have any deep thoughts at all. But it's, it's native for me, like it is for millennials. Like I feel like, okay, cool. And I feel like that with social media to a degree. Like there's other parts of the internet now that I'm like, okay, I'm feeling further and further away from this because I'm getting older. And this is just the experience everybody has as we get older. The technologies that are native to us in our youth are formative. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that most people in here are not highly swayed by cable news one way or the other. It's not like you watch something like that just changed my worldview and I'm going all in on, because we know television is theater. Like it's not trustworthy. C-SPAN's okay, but that's also not really, it's not trying to sway you one way or the other. It's like very informational. It's why it's boring. I mean, I don't like Fox News at all, but I'd way rather watch Fox News than C-SPAN because it's like, I don't know, it gets my like blood going. I feel like, ugh. C-SPAN's like you're watching Congress and they're just bureaucratic and yeah, exactly. So, but that's because like the native technologies for me were the internet. But oh man, did I get burned early on on the internet by people not pretending to not be who they are. And nowadays, most people like you can't trust anybody on the internet. But I felt like like more susceptible to that because it was a newer thing. So it wasn't like the internet wasn't just filled with people looking to scam you and rip you off all the time. In 1997, there wasn't a lot going on. It's kind of like early Facebook. It was like, oh, this is fun. Oh, there's a chat room. Oh, there's like goofy little videos and like, yeah. Like both of them were like that. It was like, oh, this is kind of because it was simple and it was unformed yet. But and then both obviously changed a lot. Think about baby boomers though. Like the television came out when they were kids. Like it is their medium and it shaped their generation highly. And they all got to, it shaped them in bad ways, but man, I long for the days when we all used to watch the same shows, especially at the same time. Cause it's like, that's not, that's not happening. That very few shows people do that with. I don't know, maybe like Game of Thrones was the closest there is to that. But even that, it's like pales in comparison to, 80 million people would watch 100 million watched the finale of MASH, right? It was like 120 million people viewed in every night on PBS and watched Roots, which is, that's brutal. Like that's not like an easy thing to watch. It's not like watching Cheers, which millions and millions of people would go every Thursday night and watch it. And I saw a clip of Jerry Seinfeld. He was hosting Saturday Night Live, and Larry David, the Curb Your Enthusiasm. He was a writer for Seinfeld. The show's about him, actually. He is George Costanza, and like a bunch of the stories in Seinfeld actually happened to Larry David. But he's in the audience, and he just kind of stands up, and Jerry's acting surprised to see him, and they're like, "Can you believe it? We had the like last hit TV show before TV got ruined." And he's like, I know. It's like we got the last 2 tickets to Disneyland before it burned down. Like you can't make shows like that. That just the media landscape's changed. And before the 90s, right, with television. Okay, like 50s, 60s, 70s is network TV. It's 3 channels and PBS and maybe like a local channel, like we had KTLA, it's channel 5. Like you'd have a few of those. And then usually like a Christian broadcasting network, like they were everywhere. They had more circulation than the networks did. And then in the like 70s and 80s, cable came out, which kind of felt like just regular TV, but on overdrive, right? You can't watch things on demand, but you've got way more options. You've got 40, 50, 60 options instead of 5 or 6. But Nixon changed something, like right in the middle of him ruining the presidency for Americans. It was I can't remember the actual right term of it right now. It's something like the fair use practice for the FCC for television and radio. It basically, if you're going to talk about like anything, any issue where there might be two sides to it, right? Like politics for sure, but all the adjacent issues, you've got to give equal time on air to the like opposing sides, right? Kind of like if you've got a ballot for voting and the propositions, they'll have the for and against, right? So you can read both of those, and then usually you're more confused than you were before you read them, and you got to talk with people and like talk in class. And I love teaching in the fall because there's always an election, and so we'll have like, we're electing people, but the propositions are super important, and they're very confusing. So it's very helpful to get to like munch on some of that live in person and dialogue about those things. So with cable television, the network still had to abide by this because they're broadcast. But for cable television, you didn't have to do this anymore. And so in the 80s, Ted Turner starts CNN, which is the first 24-hour news channel. Like nobody had ever thought like that there'd be enough news or enough material to just 24 hours. But it's very successful in the 80s. And I mean, it was, probably like left leaning a little bit, but so were the major networks. I'd say they were all a bit left leaning, because the major networks and Ted Turner and his media empire, they're in the entertainment industry. Like they're not journalists, right? Like they have news stations and journalist elements to them, but they're based in Hollywood, right? That's a liberal place. Even conservative people are like liberal there, right? My friends in LA that think they're conservative, I'm like, bro, you need to go to like Montana or Alabama, or your stuff will not fly. You'll get kicked way the hell out. You live in too diverse of an area. It's affected us in a good way, I think, like the diversity does. And interestingly, I was just reading about this. Actually, I think I was reading about this today. The guy that started, so after Nixon left, this rule had been changed. And so one of the first cable news stations to start was C-SPAN. And it was started by a former Nixon aide. And it was to like inform and bring in, just more transparency to government and bring just common people into government a little bit more, which it did. I mean, it was success. It's been successful that way. And then CNN got in, and I mean, they're doing all kinds of news. It's not just political news, but they're not necessarily forced to, give equal time. And so another Trump aide, Roger Ailes, when he left the Nixon administration, went on a mission to literally, quote, get the GOP on TV. And he bought Fox, I'm trying to remember what it was called in the 80s. It's changed so many times and mergers and stuff. But it was just the Fox television, the network, the television station, which gave him legitimacy as a network. And he launched Fox News as a legitimate network news program, competitor to CNN, but maybe for conservatives. For years and years and years, they were like, fair and unbiased reporting. Like that was their slogan, which is like laughable because it's like, all right, now they've been sued enough and had to pay out enough money and admit shows like Tucker Carlson are total fabricated like entertainment and are not news programs. Like they had to admit that in court because he just blatantly lies on his show and he knowingly lies on things. So now they're just kind of owning it, like, yeah, we're a right wing one, but they're kind of getting eaten by their own babies, you know, all the spinoffs, the OAN and News Nation. I don't know. There's like 2 or 3 other right-wing cable news groups now that are like more right than Fox. And so Fox, because they're so big and have like an edge of legitimacy, are having to like, okay, well, we can't spread election lies. Like we got caught doing that. We paid a $700 million penalty. All right, we can't do that. These other guys have a lot less to lose. The companies have been around a lot, you know, shorter of a time, and they're picking it up. So it's just fragmenting and dividing the right into like shades of extremism. To where like, I don't know, CNN's they're kind of a hot mess right now too. I kind of feel like we should just abolish all video content on politics. Like, hi, come on in. What's your name?
Yeah.
Guzman.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Well, welcome. We're just talking about everybody's favorite subject, cable news television. Yeah, but like, what if we just abolished all political talk radio shows and TV programs and just made everybody read stuff? Right? Like, hey, you want to learn about the issues? You want to see what this person has to say? You want to read an editorial opinion piece about somebody? Cool, you can read it. We engage a different part of our brain when we read than when we're watching, you know, like talk news shows or even worse, talk radio programs. They're for politics. I'm not against like talk radio, but like for politics, it's so inflammatory and just really doesn't, we tune off. Like we kind of check out when we're watching TV. That's the appeal of television, right? Like to think critically about things. It's kind of like our class being in person. It's like YouTube can't talk back to you. You know, you can't talk back to YouTube. You can't with the cable news, that's for sure. You get a little bit better of a chance with YouTube because there is a comment section, but there's nothing with cable. You're just consuming. It's just something you're consuming. So that was kind of a long tangent. It's very relevant for our class and will become, you know, more so as we get closer through the 20th century and up into the 21st century. But that was a long tangent of explaining why like technology, man, it's like our bread and butter. And why don't history books why aren't they just filled with all of this stuff of how these things develop? I don't know. I think it's because, well, talk about base technologies, right? It's like, well, why did we do something the way we do it now? Oh, because we did it this way before. And even when you're making innovations, it's like, well, why did a desktop computer have a keyboard with a big monitor, you know, on top of the box? Well, because you took a TV and a typewriter and put them together, right? And then it's like, okay, well, you get like a smartphone and the technology or like an iPad, right? A tablet, and that's starting to be different. But the predecessor technologies, they kind of determine why we do things. So predecessor textbooks are often that. It's like people usually kind of, honestly, I think when a lot of teachers go to write new textbooks, they just grab a bunch of other textbooks and they're like, what did they do? And then they're rewording things. Yeah, they're adding their own points and doing some research and stuff. But it's usually like they're changing up the primary document you're looking at or whatever. So yeah, after some years of doing that and adopting a different textbook every year, I like gave up. It was impulsive, and I did it on the first day of class. I'm like, who bought the book? And it was an overload class. There's like 80 students in there. Like 2 or 3 hands went up. I'm like, return it. We're not using it. And they're like, what are we doing? I'm like, I don't know, but I just can't with another towel. Like, I can't do another semester doing this. And it was really fun. It's dynamic. It was super crazy. Like, because we were like building the plane while we were flying it, while we were learning how to fly. But I was very gracious to that class as well. It was an interesting semester. But kind of started just building our own thing. I was building it with the class. And then I couldn't stop, and have just kept modifying it over semesters. And then, yeah, a few years ago, Kendall Hunt signed me up to publish The Darkest Timeline with them. And like I said, I'm up to 1954 in terms of like chapters available. It is my goal that by the end of the semester, I will have another chapter or 2 finished. That might not get published all the way up and through on the textbook, but I'll just send you guys like PDF or whatnot. Yeah, I have to like keep forging on in terms of that, because yeah, I kind of threw out the textbook literally and decided to do something super radical. I decided, instead of teaching everybody thematically, because every single one of the textbooks was the Reconstruction period, America and the West, the Industrial Revolution, Gilded Age America, the Progressives. And it's like, all of these things are happening at the same time. Like, it's not like, oh, we did Reconstruction and dealt with race, and then we did cowboys. Like, it's like, that's not how history unplayed, and it's not how our history works either. You know what I mean? Like, our life isn't all, God, how nice would it be if there was just some authority that was like, this is the season of this happening, and this is what's important right now. And we don't know that, right? Like, that's I've gotten into Chat GPT. I'm sure some of you guys have too. Millions of people have. This will be the year 2020. It technically launched, I think it was November of last year. But 2023, it'll be remembered as like the AI year. And so knowing, and this won't be hard for any of you to remember in the future because you'll have lived through it. So the history we lived through, it's not hard to remember kind of like the order of things or what years like important things happened. But the stuff before our lifetime, it's harder to remember that. It's like, well, I know JFK was president, I think in the 60s, and he got assassinated, and I'm not sure what year that was. It's like, people that lived through that know 100% it was 1963. Like, that, it was a turning point in America. Like, life felt dramatically different for everyone after that event. But for, I mean, I don't know, I'm not like scrutinizing ages, but I don't think any of us were alive, at least not old enough to remember the JFK assassination. Many of you were born after 9/11. That's super weird. I started teaching in 2011. So everybody in class, even the SOAR students, remembered it. Like, it was like 10 years ago, like, and then about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I remember talking about 9/11 in class, and like, nobody was saying anything. And I'm like, who in here remembers this? And not a hand went up. I'm like, oh my God. Like, I think I just canceled class. I had like an existential crisis about getting old. I was like, all right, class is done. I gotta leave. This is weird. Because it's such a wow moment for me. And there's a before and after for America that way, more dramatically than JFK or Watergate or just about anything. Even like Pearl Harbor and World War II. Like, it was so wildly unthinkable. And the world seemed so stable in 2001. The Cold War had been over for a decade and America won. And it was all optimism again about the future. Oh, until that day. And then it was like, everybody's given to fear mongering, and it's just hate politics and the Patriot Act, and it, so that's very easy for me to remember, to have context for all of it, because I lived through it. It's easier for you guys to have context on that than it is the JFK assassination too, because it's like way closer to that. Like you were born in the aftermath of that, so you get the impact of it. Like the Vietnam War, what's that for me? Like I'm 81, the Vietnam War by 1975 was like finally over. But we were definitely not done dealing with it, right? Like the 80s is when all the Vietnam War movies come out, like Platoon and First Blood, and like the Full Metal Jacket. And it's, I was very aware of that. And it's weird because like when I was a kid, all the Vietnam vets were like younger than I am now. And all the old vets were World War II vets, and we don't have hardly any of them left. Like, there won't be a single one left alive in 10 years. Well, who knows? With bionics and implants and genetic editing and all the crazy stuff we're doing now, maybe there will be, but unlikely. Either way, there's not very many left, and that's kind of what living memory is for history. So that's fading from our past. In a few years, there won't be anybody alive that lived before World War II or through or during World War II. Certainly that could remember it, like both of my parents were born during World War II, but they don't remember World War II. I mean, they were babies. And my dad passed away a few years ago. So, he's after World War II essentially, and no longer with us, as a lot of people his age, passed away, especially in 2020. Things that have locking into like those key moments though, and like learning those in a memorization sense, right? So what I'd written in, I think in the film analysis is where I was talking a bit about it. You don't have to memorize a bunch of stuff to be in this class. That's not the world we live in anymore, right? We've got all the info, we've got too much information always, and a bunch of misinformation and conspiracy theories. And literally, like, you think of a weird conspiracy theory, there's definitely already 5 YouTube channels on it, right? I mean, you could think of something out of thin air, and I'm sure somebody out there is already saying this is what happened, it's the truth, because we're living in a post-truth age, or so some people claim. But knowing hard facts, and this is the social science part of history, hard data, truth about those things, right? Like, it's not disputed that JFK died in 1963, except by total lunatics. Like QAnon people, they thought JFK was still alive and was going to like reveal himself in Dallas in 2020 to lead. JFK's a Democrat, to lead Trump to victory in the president. He would have been like 109 or something. It was like, you guys are, I can't even count how many layers of reality you're disconnected from. That's wild. Even fringe conspiracy theory people, that's like so far extreme, right? Even like most of your like crazy uncles, they'll agree, like, yeah, JFK died in 1963. There's a presidential assassination. It's on video. It was devastating for the country. It changed everything. Nobody's disputing that Richard Nixon resigned the presidency in 1974. Yeah, 4. Nobody's denying the kind of dates of World War II, right? So these are inappropriate. Truth does seem to shift, and people throw out crazy things. and things are also very complicated. So when they're super complicated, a conspiracy is a quick, easy answer to why things are the way they are, as opposed to like, oh, let's go do some like deep study of aviation and like the development of all of this science and rocketry and what World War II did to it and how we, hired a bunch of Nazis to make us get to the moon. Like that's complicated and kind of controversial and spans decades and decades. And, to be like, oh, it was just fake. Warner Brothers filmed it. It's like, well, okay, that's an easier answer, right? But you're just a step away from being like, the government replaced all birds with robots. Oh, bro, have you met those guys? There are people that believe all the birds in the world are robots. And they're sincere in their belief, right? Like, so things are shifting a lot, and we're living in a very complicated, complex time. Being able to lock into some just kind of hard data points, it gives us grounding, right? It gives us a solid footing to stand at that position and analyze the world as it was then, and maybe how it is now. So the things that I want you to like learn dates wise and kind of like lock in for memory are the life-changing things that actually shifted life dramatically for everybody. So 2008, 2009, the iPhone comes out. That is a game changer for society, right? Not for phones in the tech industry, for absolutely everything about everything. Because before that, yeah, we did have the internet, but you didn't have it with you all the time. Not really, right? So information was still kind of limited, and you're definitely not like pulling up videos and stuff on your phone the same way we do after having smart devices. But the wars, right? Like, so knowing when the Spanish-American War is, because it is actually very important. We don't talk about it at all. It's such a forgotten thing. History classes usually breeze right over it. But certainly World War I and World War II. But to a less extent, Korean War and Vietnam War and the Gulf Wars, right? That are way in the past. It's good to know kind of just the dates of those happening, right? Because then if you realize, oh, the Vietnam War is kind of, it's been going on for a while, but it really ramped up in 1966 and 67. And okay, like listening to like Creedence Clearwater or a Beatles tune or whatever, it's like, I get what's going on in the music there a little bit, or some of the subtones that you see in movies, or why other movements might have gained some juice from being set in that period, right? Because it's a revolutionary period where people are like just totally rebelling against the government and forming groups to rebel against the government, right? So whether it's gay rights or women's rights or Black rights or Latino rights or Native American rights or environmental rights, that's all happening in the 60s, in large part because of the Vietnam War. I mean, the civil rights situation in America would have been very tense and fraught and had to have been dealt with or without the war, but the war poured gasoline on it, and it just kind of like lit people up to, tell the government to fuck off. Like, you're just killing people. We shouldn't be in this. Why the hell are we in Vietnam? We can't feed people here. We're not letting Black people go to school, but you're drafting them into a war. And where the hell's Vietnam? Like, people didn't know where Vietnam was in the 60s. I mean, they found out quick enough, right? But it's kind of like, we got much better with our Middle Eastern geography after 9/11. Before 9/11, it was like, yeah, like poli-sci people and history majors and stuff could have told you like a blind map and been like, that's Iran, that's Iraq, that's Saudi Arabia. Most people probably still couldn't do that, but we should, but those are important things for us. So yeah, in terms of memorization, just pay attention to those things. And those are notes you should jot for yourself, right? Whether it's reading or we're in class or you're watching a video or whatever. If you're getting some of those basic informations, start making your own little timeline of things and putting the critical information in, because it will really help you, especially on tests. Like, there's a lot of info in the test. I mean, you can get on Google, you can Google whatever you want. You're not gonna have time to like look up everything, because trying to make some of the questions analytical. So you're having to tell me the difference between this and that and that. You might be able to read an article or two for a few test questions that you didn't read well enough for, but you can't do it for all of them. But if you've got kind of those markers along history for each section, you'll know where to go to look for the information or how things fit together. And certainly for just, your own understanding of us, of America. Like, this is why I like teaching modern American history too, by the way, because it's like, how did we get here? All history classes are answering that question, but most of them never touch to today, right? But that is this class. Like, we are beginning at the end of the Civil War, right? So the 1861 to 1865 is the Civil War. That's the dates. And you should know those, even though technically it's before the class, but it shouldn't be a hard one since the class is 1865 to present. Well, it ended in 1865 then, right? And I had a student come up to me after I told him about this, kind of like, this is why things are important. And he was like, did you know that A1 sauce was invented during the Civil War? Because it says it right on the bottle, established 1862. I'm like, I did notice that, because I've noticed that before. But he was like, that's wild. Who's making steak sauce during the Civil War? It's just so random, right? But I mean, we think of the past, something like that, the Civil War, like, oh, that's just that. All that happened in America was the Civil War. It's like, no, life kept going on. The people in New York, the war never got anywhere close to them, right? It was much more like, oh, that's all that was happening for the South, because they were much smaller, much poorer, much more like, underdog. But they did have the advantage in the sense of they didn't have to invade the North. I mean, they did, but they just had to like fend off the North from invading them, which they didn't do. I mean, that's History 107. That's a different class. Yeah, okay. So, I do want to just mention another couple things. Another reason, in addition to just teaching chronologically, I mean, that's where I was going with that, right? Like, we're not doing themes. We're just doing it each year, like 1865, boom, 1866, boom, 1867, because that's how life is for us, right? So we realize we can see, oh, in the midst of war, all of these things are happening. And like, you'll see during each war, the burst of inventions that take place is wild. And it dramatically speeds up our technological society, because the government prints its own money. So they have it's like, it's wartime. Like, the government loves war. All governments love war. It's good for the business of state, right? Because it drops unemployment. People are usually, especially if it's like a really serious conflict like World War II, we're usually much more compliant with the government. The government takes away more freedoms during war and never gives them back. That's true anywhere, though. That's not just the government. Like, you ever work at a place and they're like, they're having a temporary like pay decrease, or we're temporarily getting rid of this benefit. There, you will never see it again. They will never get rid of it. I mean, COVID did this for a billion things in a billion different industries, right? Yeah. So in addition to teaching chronologically through things and having an emphasis on technology. I also really like to get into the like nitty gritty of religion in America, which is like almost exclusively Christianity. And I don't mean that in a like favoring Christianity way. I just mean in a historical way, like until honestly, until you get into the 21st century, there is hardly any other religious representation in America. Like there's no, you know, like everybody's identifying as Christian. And I know this might be hard for us in Los Angeles County in the 21st century, but like most of the country's white for most of the time we're studying. And the big, you know, minority is Black Americans. But that's only like 12% of the country. Right? And so in the South, that'll be way bigger in a lot of cities and states, right? Some places it's, you know, it's 50% of the population. Some places 70, 80%. But then other places it's like, I mean, I remember going to Idaho when I was a teenager in the 90s. I mean, it's changed since then, but I'm like, you know, like I've lived here my whole life. It's like the third or fourth day, I'm like, what y'all do with all your Black people? Like, where are the Black people? I haven't seen a Black person in 3 or 4 days. Oh, you like it that way. Oh, you moved here from California for that reason. I'm not saying everybody in Idaho is racist. It's a beautiful state. But I know personally, like, probably a good dozen people that moved to like Idaho or Montana or whatever, because they want like to live in like a white or like white dominated society. I think that's super sad. And I'm in no way defending it, but I get it. I understand it. Not as a white person, but as any person, you know, if you're a non-white person, it's easier to live in a homogenous culture, right? If everybody looks like you and y'all have the same, you know, beliefs and religion and language and shared political history and stuff, it's easier. You just have less conflict. But you know, that conflict, it sparks, you know, it ignites things that get worked out bad sometimes, but the diversity pushes us outside of our boxes, right? Like for everybody in this room, it is easier for us to understand and like think and empathize about living in a different person's skin who doesn't look like us, you know? Maybe they're like not cisgender, maybe they're a different race or a different religion, or maybe they're a first generation immigrant. That's not hard. I don't think that's hard for, I mean, it's kind of challenging for anybody to do that, but you know, we live in Southern California. Like that's what's made LA, right? It's why we're like the creative hub of the world, is because of that diversity. You're not going to see great art and like groundbreaking philosophy coming out of Idaho anytime soon. And I think in large part it's because it's not a very diverse place. It's interesting because in Europe now, one of the things that we pay attention to from the start of the class is European anti-Semitism. And you might be, you know, coming across stuff about Jews being persecuted in Russia in the 1890s and think, what the hell does this have to do with a modern American history class? It's because we teach the history of the Holocaust as like a solitary event, and it was a fluke, right? Driven by a madman who just, you know, duped everybody into killing a bunch of Jews. That's not what happened. Europe has a Jewish problem. Like they have had anti-Semitic rallies and pogroms and just, discrimination and violence going back to the Roman Empire. It is documented. Every century, there's like persecution against Jews in Europe. The Middle Ages, it gets pretty bad, right? The 1400s, it gets bad. It starts ramping up again in the 19th century because there's a bunch of change. It's the Industrial Revolution, and just like in America, life's changing quickly for people. And folks are uncomfortable with this. And if you got displaced from your job because of the Industrial Revolution, you don't want to. What's the easiest way to deal with that? Oh, it's a conspiracy of the Jews. They took my job, or I don't have any money and I'm broke. Oh, well, the Jews are all the bankers. Do you know why Jewish people are in banking? Because in the Middle Ages in Europe, everybody's a Christian by law, right? Like you just live there. That's why they called it Christendom. It didn't matter if you believed in anything or went to church or whatever. Everybody's just a Christian. And there's a verse in the New Testament that talks about usury, which is lending money to people, your Christian brother at a profit, so charging interest on them, paying back. So, and literally, it's like, if you're going to give money to somebody, give it to them. Don't expect anything, or don't even expect to get the money back, which is like a super Jesus-y thing to say, right? Like that's good and actually great advice. If you're like lending money to a friend, lend it to them and don't expect to get it back. And if you can't afford to do that, don't lend it to them. It'll ruin your friendship, right? But if you're like, my friend needs $200 and that'd be great if he gets me back, but if he doesn't, it's cool. We've been through a lot, right? That's good. But on like a national economic level, that's disastrous, right? Because who would loan money out under those circumstances for like, big endeavors and businesses and stuff? But there's only one group of people living throughout Europe that it does not, the New Testament doesn't apply to, and it's Jewish people. So they're like, we'll lend you money. Like, yeah, it's a 10% big, like, no, cool, like pay up, right? Like that. And they're very successful, right? This is like where the Medici family comes from, where the Rothschilds family comes from. They're like banking giants, and they've been doing banking for hundreds and hundreds of years. And now Europe doesn't operate that way anymore. But people that suspected banks or were suspicious of banks or were in bad economics, it's like, well, the Jews control the money. And which isn't true. The governments control the money. But, in a lot of instances, Jewish people did control the banking system. And it wasn't a conspiracy. That's just history. Like, I gave you a very simple explanation for why that happened. Like, it's not even that complicated. But, if you're given to those kinds of suspicions, it's very easy to like scapegoat people. All of our if there's an economic crisis, like there's going to be in the 1920s, it's easy to blame the scapegoat group. In America, right, that group has historically, it hasn't been Black people historically, because, up until Civil War, most Black people in America are slaves. So, they're not in a conspiracy for anything. They're property and they're controlled tightly by people. But it's whatever the hot immigrant group is at the time. And it changes all the time. Before the Civil War, it was the Irish. Oh, God, they screwed everything up. Then after the Civil War, we start getting a bunch of Germans in and Italians and people from like Southern Europe, and they're Roman Catholic, and they're a little bit further away from kind of English society than the French and the Belgians and maybe even the Irish, right? So we hate on them. Oh, but then people from further in Europe start showing up, a few decades later. It's like Polish and Ukrainian people, and a lot of them are Polish and Ukrainian, Eastern European Jews, but it's all mixed of people coming from those countries. So we blame them. Oh, then in the 1890s, it's a flood of Chinese people had come in to build the railroads. So we blame them, and we make a law excluding Chinese people from entering the country. I mean, just straight up, like, it's so racist. It's like, we can't have any more of them in. They're too different. So it's always shifting, that kind of element. I mean, today, I would say the vast, majority of scapegoating for immigrant groups is like Latino Americans coming across the border, right? They cause all the problems. It's like, no, they're definitely not. Our economy would collapse without illegal immigrants. Well, without immigrants. We should definitely make it legal for people to migrate here easily, I think, because you don't want to be a country where people are not immigrating to, right? Countries that have more people leaving them than coming to them are in bad shape, right? They're usually in the midst of like economic meltdown and political corruption and civil war and any of those things, right? There's not a lot of people migrating to Ukraine right now, right? Ukrainians are leaving the country in droves because it's a war zone. So I don't like talking about the Holocaust. I don't think anybody likes talking about the Holocaust. It's just one of the hardest subjects to discuss. And it comes literally like boom, boom with the atomic bombs and bombing people in Japan. Like 1945 is a rough year to teach as a historian. And I think a lot of historians and history teachers gloss over it. It's like Allied victory, we won, the Nazis are dead, yay! On to the 50s, woo! We get television and Elvis, and it's all fun, even though it's not, But those are the things we spend the most time on because they are like the depths of humanity, right? And it's our humanity. That's the hard part about the Holocaust. It's like, the Germans didn't kill 6 million Jewish people. Like, Europe did that. France was willingly relocating people on trains to the Germans. They were collaborating. The Soviet Union, they were horrible to Jewish people. Unwittingly were welcoming Nazis as liberators because the Soviet Union was a horrible place for a lot of people, but it's definitely for Jewish people as well. And I have found that, in terms of conspiracy theories, that's kind of like one of the mother of all conspiracy theories is the Holocaust, because it's so big and complex and spans countries and years. And actually the lead up to it is decades long. And there's not a simple answer to it that, oh, it was faked, or it was like, oh, there was this and that, but it was kind of minimal. And the Jews actually controlled everything and they inflated all this so that they could get Israel. It's like, geez, man, that is dangerous. And I have encountered that with students for years because it is like one of those things that's complicated and, you don't want to sit and think about it. Like, it's not something that you want your thoughts to dwell on at all, because it's like, well, if Europe could do that to a group of people, that means, oh, humans can do that to each other with like the slightest provocation, and that kind of like depth of wickedness like exists within us. I don't want to think about that. I would never take part in that, but even if I'm like, no, I'm good, I'm definitely would be like in the underground resistance, like I'm squared away on that. Just thinking about my neighbors being capable of doing that is like just terrifying. Yeah, like not a fun thing to think about, but it's why we've got to do a deep dive into it, because I don't want anybody in here going forward in life thinking the Holocaust was faked or propaganda, or believing in conspiracy theories around those kinds of things. Like, look where it got Kanye. Pro lost like $2 billion because he bought into like like fringe crackpot conspiracy theories and didn't do any work or research. I mean, he famously like brags about never having read a book. Yeah, I mean, it kind of shows. Like you're not grounded. I mean, for a lot of reasons, but like you could have picked up a few books and you would have gotten squared away on this real quick. Like, uh, and that's just like on a personal like career level. Like, if that becomes a narrative in our society, which it is increasing, Holocaust denialism is like, especially since COVID. And, with lunatics like Alex Jones and people like, they just spit poisonous venom on things. So, I found that not only do we have to do like a honest assessment and clear look at things like that, not just the Holocaust, we've got to show the cause and effect leading up to it. So that's why it's like, all right, we're not majoring in this. It's not like going to be like a thing that we are focusing on every week, or that I even talk about. But in your material, you'll see like, oh, this is a big problem before Hitler's even born. Like, and it doesn't get all solved after he's dead either, right? And not only do I feel like, okay, it's hard going into conspiracy theories because they're nonsensical, but tracing the roots of them is helpful. So we're going to look at like the elders of the protocols of the elders of Zion. It's like the mother of conspiracy theories, and it was written by like anti-Jewish propagandists at the turn of the century. Henry Ford personally paid to print 500,000 copies of it to have it distributed for free. And it is like, but I mean, if we look at that and look at what it says and kind of the themes there, right? You can see, oh, that's the same in Hitler. Oh, that's actually the same in the QAnon stuff. And oh, we just kind of keep recycling this and putting a different thing on it. And, this could be weaponized real quick for a different group of people. We just replace Jews with a different group and change out some of the parts. And we're maybe back to 1930s Berlin. Like, if history has taught us anything, people, it's that we can keep repeating our mistakes endlessly. Like, we should learn from these things. I think it was H.G. Wells who said, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. Those who do are doomed to sit by and helplessly watch other people repeat it, which does feel kind of true sometimes, but we will press on and learn from it and become advocates for change. And so I think, the kind of the maybe third component or fourth, I don't know how many things I listed, for the unique approach in some of the things that we're doing, and that relates to the Holocaust, is just getting, into the nitty gritty of religion. Even like Christian published American history textbooks, they don't actually talk about religious history in America. They'll mention the same few things that secular history books will include as well, like the Scopes monkey trial and, maybe like the religious reaction to Roe v. Wade. But none of them, Christian or secular, will actually talk about all the like developments in like culturally with churches and religions and movements going on. And I guess maybe 30 or 40 years ago, it was probably harder to see how like the relevance of the rise of fundamentalism in America. But now it's a major, major playing force in our politics, like fundamentalist Christianity. And I have my master's degree. So after I went here, I transferred to Cal State Channel Islands like the second year it was open, which was it was a great experience because it's a beautiful school. It's still pretty small in terms of a state school. Like Northridge is like 40,000 students, and I think CSUCI is affectionately called the acronym, Cal State Channel Islands, CSUCI. It was like 3,000 people when I went there. It's probably like 10 now, but it feels like a private school. It doesn't feel like a state school. So if you're looking for like relative, it's in Camarillo. It's not on the Channel Island. Sorry, I burst your bubble. But if you're looking for a decent, like if you're thinking about state school, state university, it's a great school. They got a great bio program too, if you're any of your bio majors. And then after that, I went to Fuller Seminary, which is in Pasadena, and it's a graduate school that does, they've got a school of psychology and a school of theology, and that's where I graduated from with my master's. So that's like my background is Christianity and the Bible and all of that. And just to, relieve any fears, not in an antagonistic way, but I approach teaching the history of religion like I approach teaching the history of anything. I owe nobody anything. I'm not here to defend America and make her look good, right? We have some shit in our past. We have done horrible things. Our government has done horrible things. And I'm not talking about the things that you know about, like slavery and segregation. I'm talking about assassinating people, right? It's definitely not always one side of a party or the other. Like Obama had a US citizen assassinated. Like it's documented. He was on foreign soil, but there was no trial. There was no warrant, like, oh, he just had somebody drone somebody. I like a US citizen. Liberal hope my ass. No. Which that was very apparent when like he became president, was like, hey, big banks, let me sniff your butt. Like he just cozied right up to them after they had wrecked our whole entire economy and sent us into the worst economic depression since 1929. Like, all right, well, you're not really liberal. You're like a modern liberal. You're like socially liberal on issues. Like you moved the conversation forward for LGBTQ community. Like it's good. I'm not saying I didn't want him to do that, but that was good. That benefited a segment of our society. Spanking the banks and putting some regulation in and like maybe choking capitalism a little bit would have been good for everybody, right? We would not be in the economic situation we're in right now. Our inequality it's never been higher in America. This is what I mean by like, we're not an advanced society. Our tech and the wars that shoved the tech way forward, right? It pushed our society much further than where we are or able to or willing to go, right? And I think this is the frustrating thing when we study history and we're looking at things like, the civil rights movement. It's like, wow, we could have fixed this so much earlier. We didn't until we did, or address some things because people were not ready for that. And society everything just used to move slower, right? Before the Civil War, probably every single one of us would have been farmers. The whole country was farmers because farming was really hard. And we had like wooden plows and oxen. There was no mechanical things involved at all. And your parents are farmers and you probably lived on the farm next to them after you got married and had kids, and your kids are going to be farmers, and you all wear the same clothes and you listen to whatever local folk music there is. It's not like, this is my generation's music. That's not a thing. Music didn't change that quick. Fashion didn't change that quick. The physical structure of society didn't change hardly at all, but the industrialization changes that quickly. And so we're all just in a very different place than, society was in the past. And so our society moves quickly and changes quickly. And we are definitely more used to and adept at changing than people were in 1865, for sure. Because we have to deal with constant change daily. And we're like plugged into world news. You know what I mean? Like maybe in 1865, yeah, you'd find out about, oh, a volcano that went off in the, South Pacific that wiped out an island and killed a bunch of people, and oh, that's tragic. And oh, what, that happened 2 years ago? Oh, okay, like, like it's not like, oh my God, I'm watching people die in Hawaii right now. They're live streaming it. Like and that's just one thing of a billion things. Like, I got to get off the AV scanners page. It's not doing good things for my mental health. Oh, it's too much. Like, it's only like the amount of things happening, it just keeps increasing. It's like, well, there's like more and more things happening every day, and we're not meant to be thinking about all those things. I mean, maybe we are, but we needed a slower evolution to get to this point with technology than what we've been given. Our brains are like modern still, but we live in a postmodern world, right? And this is only more true the older you get, right? I mean, I give the baby boomers shit, but imagine being them. Like, you're born in America in 1950. America beat the Nazis. We saved the world. We got the biggest military in the world, and we're on God's mission to defeat communism because it's godless, atheist, and we don't actually care about that. They want to do wealth redistribution. So, it's like we got a righteous cause, and our economy's great, and we've built the best economy the world's ever seen. We've created the most compelling art forms that the world's ever seen, like the industries that we're making, and all those people were born into a very black and white world, right? Capitalism's good, communism's bad. And for a lot of them, it's like WASP, like white Anglo-Saxon Protestantism is good, and everything that doesn't fit in that, maybe it's not all necessarily bad, but it's lesser, right? This is the ideal. So if you fit that, and and literally the government's telling you, yeah, this is good, and you're that, and that's what we want to elevate. And then, as you go on, the world's changing, but it's changing slowly. Like, the 60s are way slow compared to what's happening today. It's like, we'll have flash movements. It's like, yeah, for this and this cause and that. Oh, it's over now. It's day long, right? Their stuff was building for years and changing over years. But then come the 1990s, and it's like, oh, wow, everything's changing super quick all of a sudden. And a bunch of stuff you grew up believing that we told you is actually not true. And we're starting to hate you for it and resent you and telling you you have to change. But you're old now, like you're in your 40s and 50s. It's telling you, as somebody in his 40s, it's harder to change now than it was when I was in my 20s. I am down with calling people whatever pronoun anybody wants to be called. And it would be very easy for me to learn all of them and memorize them and not forget who's what and whatever when I was 20. It's like giving me anxiety thinking about it. It's not because I'm against that. It's like, geez, it's just another thing. There's too much going on. So yeah, like I think when we're looking at the pace of these things and kind of how society changes, or how like tech changes and the pace of life changes and the interconnectedness of our global nature and what we're all living in now, realizing, going back and following that journey long before we were born, it definitely helps us, give us some grace with both older people that are alive now and just people from the past, like Pat, like the 1920s, right? Because it's easy to judge people by our values today. Every generation that's ever lived has judged past generations on their own values. Bear that in mind, knowing that we're going to get old and die, and there are going to be people studying history class in 200 years like, the hell were they doing in 2023? They elected Donald Trump president? Oh my God, like, I know it seems like, oh, well, he's like the GOP guy. In 20 years in our lifetime, we will look back on that and just be like, that was insane. Because it got normalized with like media and news media. I mean, it really got normalized, but like take his whole presidency out of the picture. Before that, take all the inflammatory things he said and like the shady character he is. He was not in the military, in like military leadership, or a politician. That's the only two group of people we've elected president in our entire history. It's always politicians, occasional military heroes. This guy was a reality television star. And yeah, Trump businesses and stuff. No, he filed for bankruptcy like 5 or 6 times before 2016. Like, he's not a successful businessman. He's successful at like maintaining his businesses and like avoiding. He's been very successful at avoiding consequences his entire life. All right, that might be changing, because it's hard to imagine any president, including Donald Trump, actually getting thrown in jail. Like, it's weird. Like, that's still, I think Donald Trump should be in jail. He's committed like so many crimes. It's still weird, and it will be like a very sad thing for our country. But I think it's like, that might be the last chance we get, not for Donald Trump, but like to course correct anything in America. Because if he gets off scot-free and there's no accountability on anything, it's like, oh, the next president, they're gonna do whatever they want. I mean, Biden, sure, if like they don't hold Trump accountable for anything, maybe he'll take some more, liberties with things, but he's old. I know him and Trump are like loosely the same age, but he seems like he's like 20 years older than Donald Trump. Donald Trump just seems like, I'm gonna eat your lunch. Like Biden, I'm not a fan of Biden. Here's the crazy thing. People are like, he's so liberal. That man's not liberal at all. He is more liberal now than he was as vice president, and definitely more liberal than he was as a senator. He was friends with Strom Thurmond, who was like a segregationist in the Senate in the 70s. You know what I mean? Like, and he is not for like progressive changes like banking laws and stuff like that. Sure, I guess, free education, like forgiving student loans, that's seen as liberal. Eisenhower proposed that. But you didn't know that one, right? Ike wanted free college for everybody. Why? Oh, because it would make America stronger, right? Young adults would be starting life without debt and smarter and more skilled, and all of America would be better for that. Like, that's not a left and right issue. You know what I mean? Like, that's how is that getting weaponized? You know what I mean? I'm neither left or right. I mean, I hate both parties. I think they're garbage and they're ruining America. I'm not just the like checked out like anarchist, like, oh, screw them, don't vote, it doesn't matter. No, like, we work with what we got here. But yeah, I mean, I'll bash Donald Trump all day long, but be assured, I have no love for like Biden or Obama or George W. Bush or Bill Clinton. I like Jimmy Carter. I got to be honest. He's a good guy. He got a bad rap. We'll get into it when we get to the 70s. But, like, I kind of like Eisenhower as a president, actually. And he didn't really do shit for civil rights. Like, it's his biggest failure. So I'm not excusing it, but it's like, he was a pretty good president, actually, otherwise. And I think maybe because he wasn't a politician, like He knew how to get stuff done. He knew how power worked. He knew how organizations work, but he wasn't, he wasn't playing political games. Okay, so let's take 10-minute break. I'm gonna go get a coffee, and we'll come back and I'll go through the syllabus like in detail and answer questions about that, and we'll talk about the movie project. So we'll get into the meat of that. I gave you guys the like 50,000 foot overview of what's in store for this semester. It's a lot of bubbles get popped. I apologize in advance, but like I said, I don't owe anybody anything. I'm not going to defend corruption or crimes or bad decisions or any of that by Republicans or Democrats or Christians or atheists or whatever. Like, we're in the truth-telling business here, and the truth, it stings sometimes. So the syllabus. I hope everybody's had a chance to, look this over. The stuff at the very end is kind of boilerplate syllabus language, about academic honesty and, inclusivity, and there's some stuff in there about tutoring and whatnot. It's important. You don't have to read it word for word though. But the first few pages though is like, yeah, read through all of that. I took time to word this specifically. So yeah, if you couldn't tell, like, your worldview, that's a big, that's kind of what we're in the business of dealing with right now. Everybody has a worldview, how you understand the world, how you frame the reason and rationale behind what happens and why it's happening. And every one of ours is different, right? It's unique to you and your experiences of life and your age and when you were born and family of origin and your education, all those things. It's going to change. And it should. And hopefully, like, that's something that, like, don't be like that second group of historians who are like, I've got it. And like, you're like, I'm locking in, this is it for the rest of life. Because it's like, well, our worldviews are evolving. And they should be, because we as people are constantly learning new things about, ourselves, about history, about science, about the physics of the universe and the way things work. So as you take more classes in college, it should expand your worldview. But the goal really of education, I think, is not to give a student a set of knowledge and skills and you're on your way and that's it. And you can finish learning. It's to be a lifelong learner, right? And it's to learn how to learn. So, a huge part of success in academia is note-taking. So working that out, how that works for you, not just for like this class, all your classes. I used to have the class write collaborative group class notes together in OneNote. I didn't do it last semester because I didn't teach any in-person classes. And it's kind of hard to get everybody up to speed and running and like getting it all working and everybody signed into OneNote in person. So doing it virtually was, I don't want to do it, but I decided to leave it off for this semester as well. But y'all have free Microsoft 365, like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all of that you get for free with your student email for AVC. OneNote's a great program. It kind of like all the functionality is just like Word. So if you're used to working in Word, it looks the same, everything's there, and it's pages, but it's set up to be a virtual version of like an old school like school notebook, which that's what I used to, every school year I'd get a new Trapper Keeper that would Velcro, and you'd have like your folder files in there that would like separate your different classes, and then pages in there that you'd have notes for those classes and things you keep there. So it's set up that way. It's very, very easy to use, and a great way to keep all your notes in one place for all your classes without having different Word docs or Google Docs or physical notebooks. And I'd encourage everybody, hey, at least check it out. It's worth it, especially you're at the beginning of your academic careers. Some of you will go on to graduate school. You're going to be in school for years to come. Some of you are like, oh God, that sounds horrible. And you'll change and you'll be, I don't know if excited is the right word, is, about starting graduate school, but like you'll want to keep doing it because you'll catch a bug, in this class or a different class or after you've transferred. So, and then, having access to those things years from now, you don't know what you're going to be doing. You don't know what field you're going to actually wind up in. And you don't know what information you're going to want to be able to return to or draw back up. Keeping quotes that really speak to you is a very valuable thing. You can come across a ton of quotes of all kinds of people in this course. And I'd encourage you, like the ones that you're like, oh, damn, that slaps, copy and paste it. Get a little quote library, whether it's like your personal, like, that makes me want to be a better person, or that really like shifted how I see the world. I'd encourage that. So I'm not going to make anybody do that, but it's in everybody's best interest to do that for all classes, not just this one. So assignments, you can see the tests, they're only 10% of your grade. They're not a lot. Not to say like, don't take them seriously. Collectively, that's 40% of your grade. You bomb all the tests, you're not going to pass the class, But if you get a B on a test, you can get an A in the class. Graduate school doesn't work that way. It's a midterm, a final, and a paper. And if you do even slightly wrong on one of those, you're in trouble in the class, and like your academic career is at jeopardy. Like PhD programs don't take 3.0 GPAs. You're competing, you get be like 3.9, 3.8. So if you get a B in a class in like a master's program, oh, it's affecting what doctorate programs you can even consider applying for. Same thing right now, like if in terms of transferring, they're like, don't go to UCLA. Yeah, do it. Like, I've had students go to, I'm sure I've had some go to Harvard. I don't know any, like, I don't know which ones have. But like I had a student go to Dartmouth, Cornell, Brown, NYU. I mean, these are like the top tier of schools, so you could transfer to those schools. Don't feel like, oh, I'm at ABC, like I'm going to Bakersfield. There's nothing wrong with that. And if it's like you want to get a teaching degree and a credential to teach, elementary school, you should not go to an Ivy League school and pay that kind of cost and tuition and everything, right? It's not, for you and me, that's not really worth it. But if you're like, well, I want to be a lawyer and I want to get into a good law school, yeah, you should like hustle to be at UCLA then, or USC. You want to like go into like a director's program or screenwriting, or you should definitely be at that, because it matters way more who you meet than what kind of grades you get in school. But you can't get to some of those places unless you get those kinds of grades. So the tests are important, but they're not going to like, I don't want anybody to have like anxiety about them. Certainly not more, at least, than you'd have about a regular, another test, but this is the lower ball. And so this is the class is kind of broken up into 4 sections that way. Poll questions, those are in-text questions in the textbook. So, and you're not like writing for them. It's like your poll. It's meant to just kind of be thoughtfully engaging, maybe pose a question to you that you never would have thought to ask on your own. It's not hard. You just have to like think about it and answer. It's easy that way. There's no right or wrong answer. Um, the participation will be, here kind of live. It'll be a mix of like in-person discussion here, and then also on Satori, which I'll get to Satori in a minute. And then the movie analysis paper is 20% of your grade. But I've definitely structured it in a way that is like easy to do because it's 3 movies and it's 6 to 8 pages. So if you do a couple pages per movie and a good like solid intro and a conclusion, okay, that's a pretty structured paper that's doable to write if you don't have like hard writing skills yet. Because while we're forced to have some kind of research paper component to the class, you're not required to have taken English 101 before taking this class, which doesn't make any sense because that's when you learn how to write a research paper for college. Like, so I don't want to have everybody try to do like hard research papers that way. And I mean, I remember starting at ABC thinking about writing 6 pages seemed like, what on earth would I say? That's so long. I have like a disease of writing too much now. Like I enjoy writing. I write a lot. It doesn't feel hard. I think the key is in any paper you're doing for any class, you want to actually research and read and study and listen to podcasts, watch videos, whatever it is, so that you're like overflowing with information about the thing you're going to write about, to the point you're like, I have no idea how I'm going to fit all this into 8 pages. It's going to force you to like outline it and plan a little bit, and like you're going to have to cut some things out. Like that's a great place to be writing any paper from, and it's a way to get over that like numbers anxiety, because certainly like when you transfer, you're going to be writing 15, 20 page papers, that's a lot longer. It's probably longer than anybody's written in here. But it's really not that long. Actually, it's not a lot, especially when you're, taking on big, giant subjects like some of these things in history. We don't usually do all the research first, and that's really how it should work. So, okay. I already talked about the textbook ad nauseum. And like I mentioned, we go up to 1954. And then after that, to fill in the gap for, your reading material, we're going to use OpenStack's open educational source for like the kind of final chapters of the 20th century and into the 21st century. And this is I guess I'll just open it up. It's a great open educational resource book. Had I never started my endeavor of doing this, I probably would have just used this. It doesn't cover all the things that I, like I'd mentioned that I care about and want to cover, but it's good. It's well written. I mean, it's free. My mentor from Channel Islands is one of the main authors on this as well. So yeah, we'll use these kind of 28 through 32, these 4 chapters there, to fill in the gaps. But to be honest, by that point in our course, you'll need a textbook less to navigate that stuff, because you'll be used to devouring information and kind of sorting things out and finding out like relevant, like the important events and those things on your own. My goal is that you're thinking that by the time we get there, you're already thinking that way anyways. Textbook will be helpful. It'll give a solid backbone for, the rest of the things we're looking at and talking about and discussing. But I never get to the end of our course. I don't think I've done it once in 12 years of teaching, mainly because 50 years ago, American history was still broken up to before the Civil War and after the Civil War. History 107, history 108. Problem is we've had 50 more years of history since then. And it's thicker than the earlier history, right? Like the history of what's happening right now is so much more involved and multi-layered and things happening everywhere all the time than it was 100 years ago. There's a lot of stuff going on in the 1920s. No, it's not like the 2020s though. So like we need more time to talk about these things. But of course, the closer we get to our own timeline, our own events and our lives, the easier that stuff is to discern and decipher and kind of figure out. And, you know, like the Gulf War is the precursor to the war on terror, and we've all lived in that and through that and know that. And so if you're digging into that and researching it on your own and learning that way, I feel like, oh, you'll be fine doing that. So my goal is really to get to like 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, maybe 1992, the actual dissolution of the Soviet Union, you know, and then I don't remember if it's 1990 or 91. That's when the World Wide Web is like officially launched. So that's like, okay, there's a world before that and a world after that. And the world after that's very different. Both of those things, the internet and the end of the Cold War. So yeah, my goal is like, well, we'll get us 1865 is a long time ago, and it's so different from us, you and me, and where we're at. The 1980s is not. I mean, it feels like another lifetime ago for me and anybody that lived through it. Here's the craziest thing that I realized like a couple of years ago. I'm like, dude, if I live to be old, like I'll be amongst the last people living that remember life before the internet. That's a crazy thought. That's crazier than thinking about, oh yeah, at some point, like the last generation of people that remember life before electricity. Like that's wild, you know? Those people would have been dying in the 1960s, 1970s. The world changed a lot since then, but oh man, not like the internet. The internet changed us way more than electricity and cars and any of those things, all of them combined. It rewired the way our brains work, right? Like, I mean, think about history class and having to memorize a bunch of stuff. It did used to be more important. My capacity for memorizing things like that used to be a lot bigger too. In high school, I probably had 50 phone numbers memorized. You had to know who was blowing up your pager. It'd just be a number coming through, you know, like it wasn't, I can't memorize a phone number to save my life. I can't like hear one on my voicemail and like remember it long enough to punch it into my phone. You know, like that part of my brain doesn't work that way anymore. In 2009, I got to teach out at the prison on 60th. That was awesome. That was a great experience. It was a wild experience. Yeah, there were guys in there that had been in since the 70s, 80s, never been on the internet once in their life. I'm like, your brain is like a human time capsule. Like, there's not a lot of people like you left that have just not been affected by the internet. Even old people that don't get on the internet a lot, it still affects us. It still changed how we live. It didn't really change much for people locked up for decades. Yeah, okay. Anyways, yeah, so this is the way we're breaking this up. So section one, note I didn't put dates here because I found that we'll get it deep in the conversation. We'll get into the weeds of things that this class cares about that maybe we need to spend a little bit more time here or unpack this longer. So it's shifting a bit, but I think I've got dates for the tests in Canvas. Those might be subject to change. I'm not gonna quiz you guys on stuff we haven't spent time going through and covering through. So, you know, the dates are the goals because it'll keep us kind of on pace to get through as much of our material as we can. And yeah, so like I had mentioned with in relation to the textbook. So Tori is like kind of our companion piece. So this is kind of what I'll be pulling up in class to, to use as our material, looking through different videos or like snapshots of the country, talking about things and giving us perspective of whatnot. But these are all, you can access all of these, and we won't have time to cover all these videos in class. So I encourage you to, what we don't do in class, get to on your own. Like, we're not going to watch these oversimplified videos on the Civil War. They're 30 minutes long. That's a long time. And it's a two-parter. So that's like, 50 minutes. It's almost an hour. But if you're kind of loose on details about the Civil War or don't really have a great grasp on it, it's definitely worth you spending 50 minutes. Or, I mean, if you're a freak like me, spend 25 or 30 minutes and watch it on double speed. I'm nuts that way. I listen to like all my podcasts and audiobooks on like either 1.5 or double speed. You can do it just right here. Playback speed. And I tell you what, it might not be a great idea with these videos because they're very fast paced normally. And we're gonna get into these for the subsequent wars, because they're great. They give you the whole shot of the beginning to the end of the war in a very small nugget and in one sitting. So you get kind of a holistic picture of what that is. But I'd say, hey, this would be a great one for you to do if you're like, I mean, I know it's between the North and the South. I'm not even sure which countries are in the South or states, this would be very beneficial because this is like setting the entire scene for the whole course, right? This is that monumental moment that's going to like define what's coming next, and keeps America together. Now, it's good. The North won. Slavery was abolished. Yay. And then we butchered Reconstruction. And actually, because a lot of people were focused on ending slavery, but a lot of Northern abolitionists, they were not like equal rights, civil rights people. They weren't like, let's integrate and have interracial marriages. And, that was not on the minds of most people in America. And so, it's a mess. And then, of course, the South never got over. They've never gotten over the Civil War. A bunch of people, millions of Americans in the South, call this the War of Northern Aggression still. The city of Lynchburg, Mississippi, was captured by Grant on July 4th, I think 1863. The city didn't celebrate the 4th of July until like 5 years ago. That is holding a grudge. Like, that's, I mean, because it's like there's nobody alive that was remotely connected to the Civil War. You don't even remember people that died that were connected to the Civil War. That's 150, 160, 170 years. That's crazy. But I mean, that's kind of where we're at. And you know what? Like, I'm starting to think maybe we should have let them just secede. Right? Like, all right, you guys don't want to go out anymore. Cool. I don't want to date anybody that doesn't want to date me. Like, I'm not going to force you to get married. Because it's clearly those problems haven't resolved. And the South is a different beast. Who's been to the South? Where'd you go?
I've got family all over.
Okay, Louisiana is like definitely like deep South. It's weird though, because like New Orleans and its whole history is so multicultural, and it's very different than anywhere else in America. I mean, New Orleans is like, it's one of the most unique cities in America for sure. Everybody, you should all like bucket list, go to New Orleans at some point. It's a great place. Yeah, but I mean, it's deep in the South. and it's just a different world there. Anybody else? Yeah, where? That's not in the South, but it is like Midwest. And I mean, that's a different beast too, like culturally, I feel like Indianapolis is maybe a little bit better than like Oklahoma or Nebraska, but like those hard Midwest states, they're like 15, 20 years behind the rest of the country culturally, even fashion wise. Like you go there, you're like, does everybody have frosted tips out here? Like, what? Don't you guys have the internet? Like, we've moved on. This isn't a thing anymore. But not having like big major, like real big major metropolitan centers like Los Angeles or San Francisco or Atlanta, like they're on the coast. And I mean, that's like the vast majority of America lives up and down both coasts. The electoral map is very misleading because in the part of the country like between the coast and the Rocky Mountains, like hardly anybody lives there. The like land density is very, very low. I'm a Sagittarius, so like I'm most comfortable when I am traveling. I'm like, I'm at home, I'm in a new place. Like I love traveling. It does wonders for our worldview. But man, for understanding our own history, it is helpful because like, oh, this place is different. Oh, you people are different over here, like different. And the South is like that. And if you go to the South today, like flying into Richmond, Virginia, which is not even that far away from Washington, D.C., it's the capital of Virginia. There's hardly any flights that go there. And the roads and rails out of there are like a handful. Like they don't have the infrastructure that the rest of the country had because they remained agrarian while the rest of the country was going through the Industrial Revolution. So the North is building railroads left and right, and new towns are popping up and factories, and the South didn't change any of that, which is one of the reasons they lost the war. They didn't have a bunch of factories and railroads and things that the North had. So anyways, I encourage you all to travel as much as possible. It really changes how we see things and how we kind of understand the vast geography that is America. Like we're just such a unique country that way. Like here's a great example of like where to use discernment and discretion in viewing things. This is The Birth of a Nation, 1915. Very different from the movie that came out a few years ago. This is one of the first like major production movies. Movies have been going for a solid like 15 years by this point, maybe 20. Like the beginning ones are short. They're like 2-3 minute little clips of people doing regular things. It was just so wild to see like a motion picture that filming a blacksmith hitting metal was like fascinating for people. They'd pay a nickel, put their eyes up to a little Nickelodeon. That's where the term comes from. It's like a little video arcade to watch a blacksmith hammer something. I mean, I'm like, this is what people did before the internet. Like that sounds boring and stupid. Like there's no appeal for any of us to do that because technology's changed so much. But I mean, I don't know. Has anybody read Moby Dick? It's like this great, American classic. The beginning of it's awesome. Set in the, Nantucket, New England fishing village, set out to sea. And then it's like 300 pages of Herman Melville describing what sperm whales look like, what a boat looks like, and what sailing is like. Because they have pictures of whales. Like they have pictures of anything. Like this, let alone video of it. I mean, I've been whale watching. That wasn't a thing people did in 1850 or whenever the book came out. Like that. it was like captivating for people and very interesting. But I mean, after you've got National Geographic, and it's quite boring. The book's boring, but it's not a knock against it. It's just like, oh, this was like a thing of its time. Like it really spoke to people then. And if you just read the book today, you'd be like, this book sucks. Like, which sounds like, yeah, wrong. Like you can't say that about Moby Dick. It's like saying, Star Wars sucks. It's like at some point, people are gonna be like, what was the deal with Star Wars? Like, I, you know, I know we think Disney owns it now, so maybe it will last forever, but like we think of these things as like eternal. Like people will always love Star Wars. No, like think about the past. People's preoccupation with different entertainment or forms of entertainment. Or I mean, think about the immense, honor and regard we have for like sports celebrities. 100 years, nobody will care. There'll be a handful, right? 100 years, well, they'll still talk about Michael Jordan, when they're talking about basketball, because he was just a force to be reckoned. He was like, you're not a normal human. You're like preternatural. Like you're different than the rest of us. And he was like wired like for competition. But I mean, we've got basketball players that are 7'7", 7'8". People are going to continue getting taller the more protein we eat and the more growth hormone that's in that protein as well. Like, it used to be like, oh yeah, everybody in Asia, like Indians and Chinese people are so short. They're not really that short anymore. Like the average height of Chinese people has gone up crazy in the last 4 decades because they're all getting protein. They're eating better, like this is what happened to humans. If you want to just trip out, if you're ever, when you go to Paris, everybody should go to Paris once in their lifetime. It's like your birthright as a human. I feel like it's a place to go. Go out to the Palace of Versailles, and this is Louis XIV's palace. It's historic. It's where like the Treaty of Versailles, the end of World War I, happened disastrously. But you can see Louis XIV's bed, and it's probably the size of that table, maybe a little smaller. Like, what? Oh, snap. People were all like 5 feet tall, like 400 or 500 years ago. Yeah, and they didn't eat protein. Like humans were just smaller back then, right? It's weird to think about. So like basketball might change. Like, geez, if the average height of Americans goes over 6 feet, and we've got literally there's people playing basketball now that can dunk without jumping. That game's gonna have to change, right? Like it's not, basketball probably won't be played the same forever. And certainly like all the people that we think about and know about today, like nobody's gonna think about them in 100 years. I mean, even now, baseball fans, right? Like, yeah, okay, there's like people from 100 years ago that we venerate, like Babe Ruth, right? He's one of them. The Cy Young Award. Could you tell me much about Cy Young? Maybe a couple hardcore baseball people, but the rest of us are like, I don't know. I don't even know what team he's playing for. The things that seem very important in the moment are in like long perspective are not that maybe meaningful. And so like what I don't know. Yes. Where is it here? It's not on the syllabus for some reason. It should be in Canvas though. Oh wait. The intro Satori here is
is not necessarily like American history specific. And there's not like, there's no mandatory thing with any of this. But it's to give us some perspective and maybe help us think about history and how some of these things interact together. Such as I've got some like random things down here for dates leading up to 1865. But here's 500 years of European colonization. Like you can see what Europe does to the world in carving it up. If you go back way further, here's like the timeline of human expansion, right? That's going way beyond the like paradigm of European history. And then go before humans and like the history of the earth, which has been around for a very, very long time before we were. This is kind of all of those maybe put together, and it's like 20 minutes long. It's very like fast paced, but it's great in just terms of getting us to break outside of our current moment, our current time frame right here. So I'd say watch this one. It's funny and like super informative and helps us kind of think about our study a little bit differently. And then, you know, in the why is this? In our first actual section here, you know, this is obviously like there's some context here with the Civil War and whatnot. But all the things right after this are the dealing with the aftermath of the war. And these are the things that, you know, if we don't do in class, which, okay, yeah, we're not going to watch any of these tonight. We will watch next week this one on the standardization of time. It's short, it's like 3 minutes long. And this one on wealth inequality in America. So you're welcome to watch them ahead of time, but you know, don't feel like you have to. But the rest of these, watch on your own. That's kind of like your homework. And I'd say watch as many of these as you can before even trying to read through the material, because it'll make reading through the material easier. You'll read through it faster and you'll retain more things. This, you know, don't watch this. It's over 3 hours long. I mean, if you're into the history of film, you should watch it because it's a landmark film. But the heroes in the film are the KKK. It's about the aftermath of the Civil War and how all these carpetbaggers, like opportunistic Republicans from the North coming down to take political offices because, you know, all the Southern Democrats were Confederates and they can't be trusted to serve in government yet before you sort all that out. So you got all these people from the North coming down, or scallywags, which were Southerners that turned Republican. So those are two like good, sick history burns that you could just totally level on somebody that you're upset with, and they won't know what you're talking about, and it's not really offensive because they're not either of those things. This movie premiered at the White House. Woodrow Wilson had a special showing of this. He's from the South. He's from Georgia. He said his earliest memory was being 5 years old. His dad was a Presbyterian minister in Atlanta. And he said his early memory was his mom and dad going up to the like church tower at night, watching Sherman's army burn like Georgia to the ground from Atlanta to the coast, basically, like, which, I mean, that's a pretty impactful memory right there at 5. Like that he was on the losing side of the South. I mean, he was a kid, like, you know, he wasn't a part of anything. His dad was a minister too, so it wasn't like they were directly involved in the Confederacy, but this movie spoke to him. He was like, oh yeah, the Klan, they did the Lord's business, cleaning up things, because, we've got all these lawless black people now running around that are a danger to our society. And that's the tone of the movie. Like they're the opportunistic Northerners and the recently freed slaves are ruining Southern society. And if you've seen Gone with the Wind, that's largely the story there too. There's allusions to the Klan in the movie, but I think they're part of like the actual story in the book, like a little bit more outright. They also use the N-word in the book, which they don't in the movie. We'll probably talk about Gone with the Wind a bit next week as well, because it's a great piece to talk about revisionist history and like revising history, and because it can go both ways. We can do revisionism in a good way and in a very harmful way. This is harmful, right? This is painting a false picture of the truth of what actually happened. Like the Klan weren't helping anybody. They were a vigilante group that they hated. Well, I mean, they hated lots of people. They didn't just hate black people. They hated Jews. They hated feminists. They hated gay people. They hated Catholics. They hated immigrants. Like they're pretty widespread in their hatred. But this was on AFI's top 100 list of American films. It got taken off 10 years later. They revised it and put a different Griffith movie up there. But yeah, obviously, if you see something that's 3 hours long, I'm not expecting you to watch that at all. I usually have it in here to we'll look at some scenes of and talk about. There's a few full movies, in these things, but this is what, like 2.5 minutes long. Most videos are going to be short, 3, maybe 5 minutes. If anything's over 10, I'm not expecting you to watch it, with the exception of those oversimplified videos about war. And so I want you guys to dig in and get all up to speed with this stuff, as well as the chapter in the book, so that next week, I talked all night tonight. I don't want to talk as much next week at all. I want to have a lot more discussion and hear from some of you and thoughts on what you're wrestling with in your material. And then in terms of participating or commenting, I'm not looking for some formal academic. I'm not grading you that way. The material's thought-provoking enough. So the things that you watch, if you watch something, you're like, oh, you have a thought about it, or you read the comments afterwards and you see somebody else's thing, you disagree with it, or you really agree with it, or whatever, just bounce off that. I'm not looking for anything long or anything specific at all. Just, your footprint on there, knowing that you're in there dealing with things. Okay, so that's Satori, that's the book. What is this one? There. And these are the links, obviously, you can click on those. The links are also in Canvas. This is not the fully updated one because the movie analysis stuff isn't in there, but that's okay. I've got a different document for that to deal with. Where are we? So this is, I'm hoping it's a good, engaging project for everybody. And with it being film, it's so broad that you should really, whatever you land on for your films and theme, should be something you really like, so you should enjoy doing this. You might not enjoy the writing aspect of things, but the project and digging into the research, and if I'm into a subject, I'll wind up going down the rabbit hole of YouTube and podcasts and whatever, too long most of the time. A lot of people are like, oh, I don't like history, but that's not true. They like history of some things, right? It's what about the history of anime or Disney or, racing, like, I mean, find your thing. And, if it helps fit into your major, even better, right? So if you're an engineering major, like getting in, doing movies that are based off of like, the space race or the atomic weapons or stuff, that would be great. That'd be like some synergy for you. So, read through this. This is a good description. I worked hard on this description of trying to lay out what this is and what I'm looking for. Try to give you kind of a little short framework for how to do that and some requirements. And then down here at the bottom, I just kind of spitballed. That's what I was doing on Monday. That's why it took me a minute to get the Canvas shell live. On possible themes and movies that would go with them. So, and this is like just to get your ideas going. Don't feel limited to this at all, and don't even feel limited to the list of movies I provided. We'll look at that in a minute. I've got a bunch of them listed in here, right? But gangs, right? There's a, I mean, this has been a kind of central problem for America for a long time, and I think maybe in the era of like the 80s and beyond, we think of gangs in like terms of like street gangs, like the Bloods and the Crips and MS-13 and stuff like that. Certainly, yes. And I mean, that's right here in the beginning of some of these movies. But West Side Story is about gangs. I mean, it's not very scary, it's a musical, but it's about racial tension in America between whites and Puerto Ricans in New York in the 50s. The Untouchables, right? That's really about the gang that took down the gang, right? The gang of federal prosecutors who acted like a gang and took down Al Capone, and the organized mob of prohibition and like that circle. But of course, The Godfather is about the Italian mafia. The Once Upon a Time in America it's an excellent movie. It's almost 4 hours long. It's really long. Oh, it's so good though. And it's about a Jewish gang at the turn of the century, and how they rise and how some of them work into political power. American Gangster is about spell it right. I should have had it in this. Anyways, I don't need to keep going on about gangs. You could do a movie, right? You could do a movie that's maybe not just about gangs, because Do the Right Thing isn't really about gangs, but it does fit this kind of ghetto theme with Boys in the Hood and Straight Outta Compton. You could do those three. They're very easy to like go off of each other, the three of them. A really good little trinity there. But of course, like taking maybe 3 different ethnically based gangs and movies and comparing them and talking about them and how they deal with race and organized crime and organized gangs of law enforcement officers, which we don't have any movies on that right now, but there will be movies about the LA sheriff's gangs, because there's a bunch of them. They're fucking tattoos. They have their own gang tattoos. Like dumbasses. Like, what? You branded yourself with proof that you're in a gang? Oh, you guys are idiots. But this is a real problem that we have right now that we're trying to deal with, trying to root out. What's that? Well, yeah, I mean, and it maybe is kind of a problem that like there is not really much of an educational requirement to become a sheriff, which is a well-paying job with a lot of power. That like, hey, if college is free in America and everybody could go to college for free, it'd be very easy to put a like college requirement for law enforcement. I don't think that's a high bar to ask in America. And clearly, we have problems with that. Not just LA, like this is in the national mind for the last decade. You could go, there's more than this, but like there's all kinds of movies dealing with like religion and Christianity in America. Hollywood as a theme, like Hollywood on Hollywood, right? So what do I have in here? Well, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I love that movie. That was great. Tarantino's movie. Babylon. Anybody see Babylon? It did not do well. I was in it. I did background work in it. It was like an open cattle call. I don't like do background work in movies. They just needed a bunch of people. So I drove out to Simi Valley and it was like a day of shooting. We started at 4 a.m. and I didn't leave till 10 p.m. Yeah, I got paid really well. But there was 500 or 600 of us extras. And it's really weird because the movie, has anybody seen Singing in the Rain? All right, they're my peoples. That's my movie right there. Singing in the Rain is just. Singing in the Rain is about Hollywood transitioning from silent to talkie movies, right? At the end of the 20s. And it's made in the 50s. And it's funny, it's a musical, it's like laughs and whatever. It's romantic comedy. Babylon is not that. It's like hedonism and oh my God, the depraved debauchery of Hollywood and the like wrecking machine that it is on people's lives, and particularly the silent era got chewed up and spit out when, the transition happened. And it's about that. So Brad Pitt's like a director who's kind of making his last hurrah movie before the transition. And he's filming this like crusade epic. And so we were all of us extras were like medieval knights. We're like dressed up in costumes and stuff that looked kind of authentic, but not really, because we were actually supposed to really be like homeless drunks that they just round up for like, hey, you'll get like a shot of booze and a hot sandwich. Get in the truck, which is like what they used to do in the truck. I mean, nothing was regulated back then. And so we're all dressed up like medieval and we're having this giant battle, and it's weird, swords and bows and arrows and stuff. And then Brad Pitt and Spike Jonze are like on an old 20s Ford truck with like driving around us. And there's like a 1920s movie set with like the wood scaffolding and stuff around our whole battle scene. And then around that is like a big Ford F-250 with the giant crane rig following the other truck. And there's another movie, like a modern, I felt like I was in Inception. I was like, oh, this is too many layers of reality all at once. Like it was weird, but it's a great movie that really like says a lot about Hollywood, and it's an homage to Singing in the Rain. Those three movies go great together. I mean, there's no end to how you could like pick movies to group together to work on this stuff. So like, I think at some point, I even put Tom Hanks movies. You could just say like, I'm gonna pick 3 movies that Tom Hanks is in. You could pick like 3. I think there's probably at least 3 Kubrick movies on the film. Like, I mean, he's like the best director. I mean, maybe not, but I kind of think so. You could do 3 movies by Oliver Stone. And he's an excellent filmmaker that cares deeply about American history. So, there's any number of ways that you could theme things together, but you want to have a theme. Like, you don't just pick 3 random disconnected movies because they're your favorite and want to, you've already seen them, so it's easy. That's actually going to be way harder. Like, you're not going to have much to say in terms of meaning or theme wise or like cohesion. And it'll probably sound stale because you're not looking at anything fresh. So, maybe I'd say, okay, if you've got if you're like me and you've seen like most of the movies on the list, then go nuts, take whatever you want. But if you've seen like 20 out of those 200 movies, maybe choose one that you've seen before, and the other two should definitely be like new and fresh. It'll make your paper better. So there's no rush for this. This is the end of the project, end of the semester project. We can work on this idea and spitball things and plan themes and whatnot as we go along. But I just wanted to get this all up in front of you. And then just eyes on the list of movies I made. So I wrote out a list of movies. I took another teacher's list of movies. This is probably like 50 movies. And then I expanded it to like probably 150. And then I asked Chat GPT to like, tell me what other movies should be on there, and got some great suggestions. I had to work with it, there wasn't all like home runs. And then I played for way too long on like all these different commands for formatting stuff. And I'm like, okay, now add date release, now add this and directors and whatnot. So you've got a whole ton of movies here that are, you should be able to see pretty quickly, like what's what. And, you'll know, a bunch of movies, even if you haven't seen them, you'll probably know what they're about just from the title. But like you might not know that Rambo, which is actually called First Blood, is about Vietnam, but the aftermath. It's about like a returning vet and being rejected from society because we lost that war and it was a national shame for America. And all the older generation was like, well, you hippies are over there doing drugs and you lost up for America and communism is winning now. Like nobody got a hero's parade for Vietnam. And I mean the movies, yeah, it's bloody. It's like it's pretty raw that way. So trigger warning on the violence. But it's pretty powerful too. And it's not the cheesy like, by the time you get to Rambo 3, he's like firing nuclear armed arrows at tanks and stuff. You're like, okay, I think you jumped the shark here, Stallone. Like, but the first one's, it's a great film. So, when you got some time and you're just sitting around, like skim through this, start reading through movies that you would like, and start coming up with a list of things that you might like to look at or themes that way. Any questions about this? Any questions about anything else? Yeah, it's late. All right, it's 9. We will call it a day. Email me if you guys got any other thoughts or questions. And yeah, have a good night.